study and master, grade 12. I love the way they explain things. It's cost accounting, obviously. And which is building on certain things that you learned in grade 10. Okay, I won't go through all. But here's what's very important. Cost in manufacturing business can be classified under the following headings. We've got manufacturing cost. Basically, these are costs that are incurred to make a product. And then we've got period cost. Period costs are simply those costs that we to run the business. Those costs are expensed immediately in the statement of comprehensive income. However, with respect to manufacturing cost, it's divided into the following. Under manufacturing cost, we're going to have direct material, which is the material used to make the product. We're going to have direct labor. These are the people making the product. They assemble the product. Okay, they take part in making that product. They're not just supervising, they're actually using their hands to convert the raw material into the finished product. That is direct labor, all right? And then we've got factory overheads. Under factory overheads, we've got indirect costs incurred from manufacturing the product. These costs cannot be traced, or e.g. factory rent and appropriate allocation basis used to allocate these costs. Okay, at varsity we'll learn more about absorption costing and ABC, so on and so forth. But in grade 12 and grade 11, you'll be given percentages or other or ratios that will allow you to calculate how much will go to the factory, how much will go to period cost, and so on. I will actually deal more with everything as we go. Under period cost, we've got administration cost, that is like your Mrs. Rauna, people that are working in the admin office, and we've got sales and distribution. These will be people like Dr. P that are marketing the school and so on, right? They just make sure that we have people that can buy. Actually, I was reading an article which said that during this COVID lockdown, it is actually an appropriate time to start marketing, so that people don't forget about you. And that your direct material cost, I normally refer to them as DMC, DLC, and FOC. All of those that will be taken to what we refer to as the production cost statement to calculate the cost of production. And with respect to your period cost, it goes straight to the and under expenses. Okay. Types of manufacturing cost. We've got this person that manufactures canoes, and oaks and so on to illustrate these costs. Now, when you produce a canoe, the direct material you will need that will be consumed directly in manufacturing a product will be wood, glass fiber, resin, cabling, pedals to make a canoe and all. And under direct labor, obviously, it's people that assemble the whole thing. Under material, we'll also have indirect materials that are incurred during manufacturing process, but they're not directly identifiable in the finished product. Like the screws. Screws are normally hidden balls of canoe, and brushes, cloths, and molds to make it, right? Now, all of these are indirect. You cannot see them with the naked eye. Okay, so basically, the ones that you can see with your naked eye, we normally refer to them as direct material cost. I know there's a silver line between the two. And then we've got direct labor, because these are people that transform the raw material to a finished product. They work in making or building the canoes. And then we've got indirect labor. Indirect labor are the people that work at the factory, but they're not directly involved in making the product. Like the person that records raw material that comes into the factory, or raw materials that leave the factory. Those people, we refer to them as indirect labor. They're not directly involved in making the product. Even the supervisor is also included under indirect labor, because they're just overseeing direct labor to make sure that the direct labor is doing the work that they're required to do. Then we got factory overheads. These are the costs that are involved in making the product, but you cannot actually trace them to the product. Like electricity. Electricity can be used for various things, all right? And you cannot directly trace how much electricity was used to make a certain one canoe, for instance, all right? Obviously, under factory overheads, we've got depreciation of, it must be machinery that is used in the factory, and then indirect material, as well as indirect labor. So indirect material and indirect labor, they all and the overhead, just like it's being shown to you right now. Okay, that's why I love these notes. They're awesome. Factory overhead costs thus includes all the production costs, excluding direct material cost and direct labor cost. Okay, and obviously that's what we are simply making right now. Now we have cost direct labor. I did tell you direct material cost will be. We'll have direct labor. These are the people that are physically involved in making the product. They're cutting the wood, assembling, the screwing, and so on. All right, and then we've got factory overheads like electricity, nails. We've got a bookkeeper that works at the factory. We've got a supervisor that supervises those direct labor to make sure they're doing the right job. If you have noticed people that are constructing roads during road constructions, you will see people that have that are physically involved in constructing the road, and you'll find these people in suits that are driving normally double cabs, that are just watching to see if those people that are digging holes or whatever are actually doing the right job. Those people are called indirect labor. They are not physically involved in making the product. Funny thing is that they get paid more than those people that are directly involved in making the product. The thing is, if everything goes wrong, they will be the ones that get the job. Actually, they will be the one that will be dismissed, because that is what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to make sure that direct labor do what is right. Okay, and then we've got prime costs are simply your direct costs. We've got factory overhead, which is what we refer to as manufacturing cost calculations. Prime costs are made of two costs, which is your direct material cost as well as your direct labor cost. Those are your prime costs. So when I ask you what are your prime costs, you need to tell me prime costs are simply my direct material plus my direct labor. And then we manufacturing costs. For you to calculate your manufacturing costs, you just take your prime cost, you add your factory overhead. I will ask this later on and end up forgetting it. Total manufacturing costs are simply plus factory overheads, and you normally use the two to calculate your total manufacturing cost. Okay, please note that your total manufacturing costs are not just made up of direct material and direct labor, they're also made up of prime factory overheads, as a matter of fact. So to your prime cost, you have to add factory overheads to determine your total manufacturing cost. Now, when you calculate the unit cost of a product, you will simply take your total manufacturing cost and divide it by the number of units produced, right? Your unit cost is simply your TMC, your total manufacturing cost, divided by the number of units produced. Then we've got classification of manufacturing costs according to behavior. I won't dwell much into some of them. The term cost behavior refers to the behavior of a specific manufacturing cost in relation to changes in production. Certain costs, whether you produce more or less, they remain the same. So we normally refer to those as fixed costs. And then we've got variable costs. They change as you produce more, you incur more cost. If you produce less, you incur less cost. Then we say costs vary, they are variable, right? And we have semi-variable. These are step costs. They are fixed at a certain point, and then they increase, and then fixed, increase, fixed, and so on, right? Semi-variable, and we've got semi-fixed. Basically, I just want to explain the difference between semi-variable and semi-fixed. Semi-variable simply says that your production cost will simply vary according to the number of units, but probably if you produce 10 units, they won't vary. And then if you produce 20, then they vary. So basically they're semi-variable. With semi-fixed, semi-fixed simply says that you won't use a certain electricity, and up to a certain point. Once you reach that point, your cost will increase, and then they remain fixed for a certain period. Okay, those we refer to as semi-fixed. I know there's a silver line between the two, between semi-variable and semi-fixed cost. I will explain them later. Okay, I did explain all of that. Fixed costs, they remain the same. Variable costs, they remain the same. Note that with respect to variable cost, it's like your straight line. The more you produce, the more cost you have. So it has a straight line that is increasing. Okay, semi-fixed is just a straight line that is fixed. Basically, the gradient there is 0. Okay. Semi-variable, I did explain this. They both fixed and variable component, and basically this will be your semi-variable. So basically, what I meant, that they will be fixed up to a certain point and then they increase. Okay, with the semi-fixed, it means that they remain fixed at a certain point, they increase, and then remain fixed at a certain point, they increase. Okay, and that's the difference between semi-variable and semi-fixed. Semi-variable, they are fixed up to a certain point, and then after that point, they vary according to the production, according to the number of units produced. Okay. And then I did talk about cost classifications. I can simply say raw materials and direct material and direct labor fall under variable cost, and factory rental, which is overhead, will fall under fixed cost. So fixed cost will be your factory overheads. Variable cost will simply be your direct material and your direct labor, which are your prime cost. Okay. Now total manufacturing cost under, if you use a fixed cost behavior, it will simply be fixed cost plus your variable cost. That's how you will calculate your total manufacturing cost using cost behaviors, right? Unit cost, as I've specified, you will take your total manufacturing cost divided by the number of units produced. Now let us look at this example here. We've got 100 units produced. These 100 units variable cost will be 1,000. Fixed cost is 500. What will be your total manufacturing cost? Your total manufacturing cost will simply be 100 times 1,000, which is 5,000, and then to that you will simply have to add your fixed cost, which is 5,000, and your total cost will be 6,000. Okay, so basically your variable cost is simply 1,000. Your fixed cost will be 500. You add the two, that will give you 6,000. Okay. We produced how many units? We produced 100. If we produce more units, please know that the cost per unit will simply be 60 rand. That 60 rand was 6,000 divided by 100. Okay, your variable cost per unit will simply be 1,000 divided by 100, which is 10 rand. Okay, in this case, know that if you produce 500 units, your variable cost will be 5,000. So your variable cost will increase the more you produce. However, look at your fixed cost. Your fixed cost will still remain the same. They do not change at all. Okay. Now, since your fixed costs remain the same and they do not change, it simply means that your variable cost will increase as you produce more units. Your total manufacturing cost will simply be 10,000 rand. Unit cost will be 20 rand. So that is cost per unit. So you realize that the more you produce, cost per unit will decrease. Please note that if you produce 1,000 units, your variable cost goes up, but your fixed cost remains the same. Your total manufacturing cost will be 15,000. Note that your unit cost will decrease the more you produce. From the table below, this is how you calculate your variable cost. It's just 10 rand per unit. It remains the same. However, look at your fixed cost. Fixed cost will actually decrease the more you produce. Variable costs remain the same, but fixed cost will decrease the more you produce. Now, this is one important thing. What is break-even point? Break-even point is a point where you're neither making a profit nor a loss. You need to actually determine your break-even point before you can continue with production. Okay. Now, for you to calculate your break-even point, you need to follow the following steps. You need to first calculate your fixed cost, and then determine the selling price per unit and the variable cost per unit. And you will have to determine your contribution. Your contribution is simply your selling price per unit minus your variable cost per unit. The last step is simply take your fixed cost divided by contribution per unit. So basically it's like your fixed cost divided by selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. It will give you a break-even point. You want to produce more than your break-even point. You don't want to produce less than your break-even point, because if you produce less than your break-even point, it means you're going to make a loss. If you produce more than your break-even point, you will make a profit. Okay. Obviously your break-even point, it's where you're neither making a profit nor a loss. The point is that you need to produce more. So your break-even point is simply where your income from sales is the same as the cost of manufacturing. Now let us quickly calculate our break-even point here. We are given fixed cost, which is 10,500. We also given selling price per unit and variable cost per unit. Now, firstly, you need your steps that you need to follow are step number 1, fixed cost. They are given to you, which is 10,500. Step number 2, determine your selling price per unit, which is 1,000 rand. Step number 3, your variable cost per unit will be 700. Step number 3, you will have to calculate your contribution per unit, which is 1,000 minus 700. I did say contribution per unit is your selling price per unit minus your variable cost per unit, and that will be 1,000 minus 700, which is 300. So your contribution will be 300 per unit, simply like your profit sort of per unit. Okay. To determine your break-even point, you will simply take your fixed cost divided by contribution per unit, which is 10,500 divided by 300. So that will give you 35 units. So you need to produce more than 35 units. If you produce 35 units, you will not make a profit nor a lot, or nor suffer a loss. But if you produce less than 35 units, you will make a loss. If you produce more, you will actually make a profit. Okay, so you will be happy. We'll talk more about productivity. Now, productivity, it's simply about increasing production. You want your employees to be motivated to produce more. It is essentially the relationship between input and output. Your input is the number of hours you put in, and the output is how many units are they producing. Now, motivation for all employees is simply money. So to motivate, to make sure you increase productivity, you need to make sure you pay your employees well and they've got good working conditions. Make sure if it's a factory, it's well ventilated. I know there was a factory that was found somewhere in KZN where they locked their employees because they wanted them to produce more masks. So that was not a conducive working environment. So for you to increase productivity, you need to provide a conducive working environment for your employees. Okay. Now let's look at this. You produce 160 units, and in a week you'll have 40 hours. That is 8 hours per day. Okay, and you normally have five working days. Now, if you take 8 hours and multiply by 5, it will give you 40 hours per week. Now, if they produce 160 units per week, it means that they produced 4 units per hour. If they produced 200 units per week, it means they produced 5 units per hour. Now, this is what you want them to do. You want them to increase productivity. And productivity also goes with experience. The more experienced you are, the more you will produce. New people, they will actually take longer to produce more units. And the point is that you want people to increase productivity so that you can increase your profit and meet your demands, all right? Because you need to supply. So basically, set target for employees. Normally, you tell them that you produce the 5 units per unit. If you produce more than that, I will pay you more or something. But please don't make sure that it doesn't compromise the quality of the products that they're producing. Okay. Reward employees who reach targets, provide favorable working conditions, provide well thought out production lines. Well thought out production lines simply means that you cannot use when your raw materials enter through, normally raw materials enter through the back of your warehouse, and then when the units are produced, they need to exit through the front. So you need to think of well thought out production line where people don't have to work a distance to put wood into the machine and process that machine and then go back. So there needs to be a well planned production line where raw materials enter. They need to go through probably, let's say, machinery. From machinery, there needs to be where they assemble the product. From assembling the product, there needs to be painting. From painting, they go out. You cannot have raw materials coming in and then painting and then machinery right at the end, and then they have to come back and paint, and then in between it'll be a mess. So it needs to be a well thought out production line. Okay, adopt ethical code that encourages integrity and professionalism and strong work ethics. So basically, people need to be honest, need to be professional, and they need to work hard. So you need to encourage people that as long as you're here, you need to work, period, nothing else. Okay. We will deal with manufacturing ledger accounts at a later stage. I'm going to jump this for now, and I'm going to get into something else which is very important shortly.